Anxiety is usually treated as an enemy, something to manage, something to reduce, something to eliminate. And sometimes it is exactly that, a signal from your body that something needs your attention. But not all anxiety is a warning. Some anxiety is a habit. In fact, in many parts of modern life, anxiety has become socially acceptable, even admired. Being worried can look responsible. Being stressed can be perceived as productive. Overthinking can look like intelligence. If you're anxious, it can feel like you're taking things seriously, like you're paying attention, like you care. But anxiety has a strange way of disguising itself. It can feel like preparation when in reality it's repetition. You replay the same scenario in your mind. You imagine outcomes, you rehearse conversations, you analyze every possible mistake. And it feels useful. It feels like you're doing something important. But often, nothing is actually happening. The mind is simply circling the same territory again and again. And that circling creates an illusion of control. On this episode of Must I Evolve, I'm continuing my conversation about invisible cages. And in this episode, we're talking about anxiety and maybe the luxury of anxiety. Welcome to Must I Evolve, a micro-learning experience where ancient wisdom meets the modern soul. I'm Andrew H. Housley, author, spiritual provocateur, and bodhisattva, doing my best to walk the middle path. This space, it's for the seeker, the skeptics, and those who feel the quiet pull for something deeper. Each episode is an opportunity, short, potent, and quietly disruptive. We explore Zen thought, spiritual lessons, personal transformation, and the subtle truths that shape us. Sometimes they appear as a question, sometimes a gentle nudge. Let's begin. If you worry long enough, it can feel like you're protecting yourself, like thinking through every possibility will somehow prevent the worst one. But anxiety rarely resolves the situation it's focused on. It just keeps the situation alive in your mind. Overthinking can also become a way of delaying something else. Sometimes it delays action. If you're still analyzing the situation, you don't have to decide yet. You don't have to make a move. But anxiety can also delay rest. If you stay worried, you don't have to slow down. You don't have to sit with uncertainty. You don't have to face the quiet moment when nothing is being solved. In that way, anxiety can become kind of a companion. Not comfortable, but known. And the known, however painful, often feels safer than the open or unknown. It gives the mind something to do, something to hold on to. Without it, there might be silence. And that sounds crazy. And for many people, silence feels more unsettling than worry. And there's a Zen story for this. Surprise. A poor man was out walking that night when he spotted something in the dirt, a bag of gold half buried in frozen ground. He pulled at it. Nothing. He clawed at the ice with his fingers. He kicked it. He threw his full weight against it again and again, certain that if he just tried harder, applied more force, found the right angle, the gold would finally come free. He struggled until his body gave out. And then, in the stillness of exhaustion, flat on his back, he looked to the stars, and there were none there. He woke up, tangled in his sheets, still reaching, still pulling on that imaginary bag of gold. The gold was never stuck. He was stuck inside the dream, and no amount of effort within the dream could have solved that. The only way out was to wake up. An anxious mind works the same way. You can pull at your thoughts, wrestle with them, analyze every angle, and nothing moves. Not because you're not trying hard enough, but because the problem isn't where the mind thinks it is. The effort is real. The ground is not. This is the quiet shift. An unsettled mind treats every thought as urgent. A settled mind sees thoughts for what they are, passing events. And from the perspective of a settled mind, anxiety begins to look differently. It starts to look like a luxury. A luxury of a mind that has the time and space to rehearse imagined futures. When the mind becomes quiet and steady, anxiety loses its attraction. Not because the world becomes perfectly safe, but because the mind stops feeding the stories that create fear. When anxiety takes hold, it usually isn't protecting you from the present moment. The present moment is often much simpler than the mind expects. Instead, anxiety is protecting a narrative, a story about what might happen, a story about who you need to be, a story about what must go right and can't go wrong. The mind clings to these stories because they give shape to uncertainty. But uncertainty is a part of life, and no amount of anxious thinking removes that. The shift begins when you start to notice anxiety in real time. Not when it becomes overwhelming, but when the first loop begins. When the same thought repeats, the mind begins rehearsing again. In that moment, something important can be seen. You're not actually solving the problem. You're maintaining the story. And once that becomes clear, a different choice becomes possible. You don't have to fight the anxiety. You don't have to push it away. You can simply notice it. Notice the loop. Notice the tension. Notice the pulling on the bag of gold. And then you gently step out of the circle. You stop pulling. Not by solving everything, but by returning to what is actually happening right here, right now. The breath, the room, the moment in front of you, the sound of my voice. When intention returns to the present, anxiety often loses its momentum. Not instantly, but noticeably. Because what anxiety protects is rarely danger. It's a story about danger. And the key insight of this episode is simple. Anxiety often protects a story, not a threat. And the moment you see that clearly, something becomes possible. Not perfect certainty, not control, but something quieter and far more useful. The mind has stopped mistaking worry for wisdom and found something steadier underneath. And in that steadiness, another bar on our invisible cage starts to become weaker, and we can free ourselves from that cage. Thanks for listening to Must I Evolve? Remember, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be patient. That's the real practice. As for your next evolution, it doesn't live in who you should become. It lives in what already grows within you. Until next time, keep evolving, quietly, consistently, and always with no expectations.